Okay, now continuing on. This is his second letter where they wanted to elicit more details from him. And the impression Kuehn had left with his first letter, just to review this, was that he had gone to the consulate without any real reason or without any history of the consulate. All the while, the FBI is aware of these of the flat-out solicitation they made in June of 1940, and probably confronted him with this. And they made note that he said that he was there to get them to deliver a package of food for his son Leopold. you know. You got, it's just freaking food, for God's sakes, that can go bad. What are you gonna do? Cookies or something is gonna come, in a box. And look at how many people have to get involved in this whole thing. The consulate, he's got to deliver it to somebody else who's, carried in trains and boats and automobiles across Russia and finally to Leopold's lap so little old Leopold could have a 1-pound package of food. And their visit, and just to make this very clear, their visit in I just don't buy that thing about the food, but their visit in July and August really was about motivating the Japanese to deliver the funds from Dr. Homburg, who he hadn't said yet, he now will say was his daughter's fiance, to bolster the credibility of those transactions. They're finding it quite fantastic. They probably don't really understand how that transaction would work. But basically, as he earns money, he's making installment payments on a piece of property he bought from Mrs. Kuehn. The simplest way to put it. He didn't make that all that clear. So, this is written January 3rd. Same agents, Sterling Adams and George Allen. And they say anything he says might be used against him in court, and he's not required to make a further statement, whatever. Then he goes into the story about Kyogoku, his friend who basically, when he was learning the Japanese language in Japan, he just met this guy on the boat, and the guy treated him very kindly, showed him around. And then he attempted to get a permanent residence in the United States. And this is where this part here is important. Whatever I was asked to do was to be for the Japanese. While we were eating dinner, Kyogo began very tactfully to question me as to whether I would from time to time furnish him information about Honolulu. This information, or whatever I was asked to do, was to be for the Japanese government. I refused to have anything to do with the idea, and Kyogo never mentioned the question anymore. And then here towards the end, and clearly Kuehn doesn't understand, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And what Kyogo did, as I referred to earlier, is say to Mr. Kuehn, well, if you ever need anything, just ask, and I'll be more than happy to help you. After Kuehn had turned him down um, when he was asked to spy for the Japanese government. And what the wink is Kyogo is saying that well, if you need a favor for me, I could do it, but obviously, I want you to spy for the Japanese government for me to do those things for you, and that's how it ended up turning out. Of course, Kuehn doesn't really spell this out, so and he did not communicate with him in any way until 1940, and received a Christmas card in 1936 from the guy, and then he finally gave up on him. 4 years passed, and suddenly, surprise, surprise, here's Kuehn trying to say, yes, I will spy for the Japanese government. That's what those 2 wires were for. And then Kyogo tried to show an act of good faith and sent the $10,000 on behalf of Dr. William Homburg. And he goes over this again, spring 1940, which is April. My wife went to Japan, returned about seconds, and it's on the boat list. Came from William Homburg. Following her return to Hawaii, about 4 weeks later, I received a letter from Dr. Homburg advising me that it would be necessary so that would be May, necessary to make some arrangements to get any additional funds out of Japan. It was becoming too difficult and dangerous for him to do this. About 3 weeks after receipt of his letter, I wrote him suggesting that he contact Baron Kyogo, an old friend of mine. Yeah, right. That he turned down. That wanted favors for him. It wasn't the other way. Could assist us in sending the money to Japan to Honolulu. This letter, I sent a Duden grammar dictionary to kind of give him a hint that he was willing to spy. At the same time, I retained a duplicate dictionary in my possession. Then he told Homburg that he's going to use some kind of code, and the numbers, it means money or whatever. And that's the only code he ever sent. I remember reading somewhere here that Homburg was supposedly fiance to Ruth Moore. Homburg would send presents to his daughter sometimes. This guy would deliver stuff. And then one time, he got a telephone call and was asked to meet him in front of some office. And he handed him $10,000 and told him not to write Dr. Homburg, but rather to address Kyogo directly to keep Homburg out of trouble, because Homburg didn't want to get in trouble by any means or have his, and there's some details here. They were arguing when the next amount of money was going to be delivered and how to communicate about that, and different difficulties about, because he's a resident alien, he's got to confirm the monies that he had in his bank and all this other stuff. Because he wanted to get the rest of his money, and this is now a year later almost. 10 months later. And then because he didn't do anything. They did him the favor of the 10,000. He just didn't do anything. Now they might have had this 14,000 for months. Payment number 3 from Dr. Homburg, and I have something for you from Dr. Homburg, he says, and hands him the $14,000. He kept bugging the consulate about this, and finally he said, "Dude, quit coming to the consulate." And then there was a piece of paper written in English asking if he had a shortwave transmitter and if I would be willing to do a test, and then it was typewritten. He ended up burning that, and then he had a sheet of paper, and I wrote on the sheet of paper I was unable to make the test. So he succeeded in getting all of his money and giving nothing to the Japanese at this point. So it's so silly when it comes down to $500 to his son that's the detail he got hung on. Burnt up the letter. And then after fool me once, shame on me. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And after the shame on me had happened, he shows up to the consulate asking them to transfer $500 through Yokohama Specie Bank, and the consul told him to fuck off. And he said, okay, I'll tell you how many ships are in the water. And he came up with his signal plan, had to simplify it, came up with a pretty good educated guess about the number of boats in the water, handed that to the vice consul. And on December 2nd, which was 5 days before the attack, he went back and took 2 envelopes containing the money, the $500, and the other containing the simplified system of signals that he'd already outlined. All right, so eventually the legal bureaucrats looked over his 2 confessions and said, we got him, basically. The next part I'm going to get to is going to be like that. We have the information we need to convict him. He said he told the Japanese consulate how many boats were in the water, and that's it. And that's the basis they prosecuted him upon. And, the trial was done before the end of January, and took 3 days, and he was found guilty. And then in my aftermath video, we know what happened to the wife and daughter. It's not really clear what happened to his youngest son. Now we're just going to have some more outside. After they collected these confessions, I guess, this happened. On 3 different distinct occasions, Kuehn's resident home had been searched for information pertinent to the case. The last search was conducted by the writer on January 1st. At that time, every possible place of concealment was thoroughly searched, and as a result, address books and correspondence, all in German, were obtained. After being translated, the following excerpts were noted. The original correspondence reflected here, along with English translation, is being maintained in the Honolulu office. And there's some address books. There's some quotations from letters that were originated in Germany, which are blanked out, so we have no idea what they said. The above quoted letter was not brought to Kuehn's attention during the interview. Okay, during a visit to Otto Kuehn's his Kaluma residence, January 4th, by whoever and the writer, it was ascertained that it is possible to observe the larger dormer window at the top of his 2-story residence. From almost any vantage point off the mouth of Lanikai Bay, even in the daylight, agents could observe and distinguish this residence with its red rooftop and dormer window from Lanikai Point. Located right on the beach, distant about 1/2 miles from the Kaluma house. Neighbors in the immediate area of Kuhn's residence informed that when lights in the house were on, the reflection through the dormer window was clearly visible. It's also been ascertained at Otto Kuhn's Lanikai Beach home that a clothesline is strung on the beach side of the house. And further, if linen were strung on this line, there is nothing to obstruct the view from any point at sea within the Lanikai Bay area. Yeah, but what are you going to look for? Come on. I mean, wouldn't it be? It would be so much easier to just observe the number of boats in the harbor from a frickin' submarine. It was also observed at Okune's Kaluma residence that he keeps a star sailboat and sails for the same. All these sails bear the Roman numeral 3 and letters about 16 inches high, 3 inches wide, of green cloth. The starboat apparently has not been in the water for a period of time, as the seams are drawn, so it would probably take several days before it could be placed in seaworthy condition. The only large lights observed at the Kaluma residence were the 2 lawn lights with reflectors having 2 to 5300 white bulbs, which were mounted on the garage in the rear of the house, and one at the corner of the house. In the rear matters the light in the yard, the rear of the Kuhn's residence. It is to be noted that the rear of the residence is away from the beach side. This is his Kaluma residence. The Lanikai Beach house just had a clothesline. But again, the cable said Lanikai. Second of all, who knows if the Japanese would even know where Lanikai was from, while they're out at sea, where's Lanikai versus Kaluna, how are they going to know that? Okay, so this was sent by the Department of Justice to the Director of the FBI on January 7th. Dear Sir, I'm transmitting here with a report rendering this matter. January 5th, 1942 by redacted. Another report rendered same caption by redacted June 6th. Connection reference is also made report by Special Agent in Charge R.L. Shevers from December 26th. The report of blank sets forth the activities of Otto Kuehn, both of whom are subject to the Honolulu file. While it is obvious that Otto Kuehn and his wife Friedel have not made known the full scope of their activities and their espionage work for the Japanese government and the Japanese consulate in Honolulu, the facts have been established and recorded in this report furnish conclusive evidence that Otto Kuehn and his wife Friedel Kuehn were paid agents of the Japanese government in Hawaii. I don't agree it's conclusive. I don't. Because we're picking and choosing the parts of, Otto Kuhn's testimony by which we're going to decide we're going to believe. It appears from the information developed by this office and the statement of Otto Kuehn himself that he took the signaling device system, which he himself prepared at the Japanese consulate on December 2nd. This is the system which the Japanese consul general at Honolulu transmitted to the foreign minister December 3rd, as set out in a full report Special Agent in Charge R.L. Shevers referred to above. It appears from reviewing the... Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the signals here, because, it's easy to say, oh, well, they used it. He created it, they used it. Okay, we're good. We got the right guy. All right. So, yeah, if they didn't have those signals, they wouldn't have succeeded. And I didn't read a lot of the detail of the signals. I admit that. Because, frankly, it's numerous and tedious, but that's, the deal is what it was that, in general, it was designed, for some Japanese government agent or something was going to be stationed somewhere in view of a house at Lanikai. that was actually being rented out. Okay, but the way it was supposed to work is if the light was on during certain hours of the night, and these are whole hour blocks, that would mean that a certain number of boats were in the harbor or a boat had left. Now imagine this. There's only this is the limit to the Japanese presence was the consulate in his office and whatever he could see. With the ability to send encrypted cables that would stay encrypted for about a week and then eventually be broke. The Japanese had boats. I don't know if they had subs, but if they had subs, clearly the subs could go and on a reconnaissance mission and find out what the hell was in Pearl Harbor. Just stay its distance, up periscope, and have a look and make a note of things. One would think, or but this would have to be observed from some location. The FBI surmised it was probably Japanese subs that were observing this if it happened. Well, if you're in a Japanese sub and you have a periscope, are you going to sit there and you'd have to stay there for this signal system to work? You'd have to stay inside of the house for an entire 24-hour period. The lights can come on at any time according to the code, and if the lights came on between 4 and 5 a.m., that meant that there's this, and then you think to yourself, well, why am I looking at this dormer window and I could just, take my boat up a few miles to where the American fleet is and maybe make a few notes myself, right? And that's the circumstance. That's exactly the way I think of it. It just doesn't make any sense to even use a system of signals. They gloss over that part. They don't think over the veracity of the signaling system to draw their conclusion as to how valuable this information was, even though it looks clandestine. And that was the mistake Kuehn had made. He thought they would just know, they'll just look at it and they'll realize, the joke was on the Japanese. Give them a high five and let them go. It wasn't that way. They were out to get their man. And certainly he was their man to get. And they did. And they just didn't think about it all too much, how this is a submarine out in the bay going to look at clotheslines? All right, so some people have kind of tried to revise this historically, and in the modern day, now the story's changed where, perhaps the signals would have been sent, and the consulate would have observed the signals and then sent a wire. Well, as recalled, all those signals were actually broken. They had decrypted the code, and in fact, and there were no correspondence at all regarding the Friedels or any purported activities from between the summer of 1940 and December 3rd. Just about the time he went in there and, submitted his first set of codes and came back with the second one and tried to get the $500 sent to his son. And they had been monitoring this. If there were other cables that regarded him, they would have found it. So you have to eliminate that possibility too, that the consulate was looking out at the Lanikai house and then sending the information on to Japan. It just doesn't work. And if it was by any other means to observe the Lanikai house, they had a better choice of just simply looking at the boats themselves and not trying to decipher codes and stay positioned. So let's get back to this. So the office has not developed any evidence that these signals were sent or given at any time between December 3rd and December 6th. Kuehn himself says the signals were not used or sent. Let's go back there. Information is that the system that it was intended to be effective only up to and including December 6th. However, it does not indicate a limitation in time for sending the signals, but it seems conclusive that the signals devised would indicate one of the 7 sets of facts only up to December 6, 1941. Don't know what they mean by one of the 7 sets of facts. Unquestionably, there's already sufficient information developed as to the foregoing reports reflect to substantiate a conviction of Otto Kuehn if he were tried in the United States Court for Espionage under the appropriate federal laws. And that's what I meant. He broke the letter of the law. He told them about the number of boats. But I think the consulate already knew that, and the Navy, if they really wanted to know, they could find out. They'd send a sub. At this time, as you know, the federal and civil courts have been stopped from criminal prosecutions. There is considerable legal opinion in Hawaii at the present time that the Provost Court and the Military Commission, which have been set up over martial law, now have jurisdiction over criminal offenses committed against the law of the United States and the laws of the Territory of Hawaii prior to the declaration of martial law December 7, 1941. As a matter of fact, the territorial offenses have already been tried. Some territorial offenses have already been tried in the Provost Court. The sentence is posted after conviction. The Provost Court has jurisdiction over offenses where the penalty is not greater than 5 years in prison and $5,000 fine. That's interesting. The Military Commission is the court which now has jurisdiction over all capital offenses, and that's, I guess, where he's going to get tried, and other offenses which were prescribed punishment is in excess of 5 years imprisonment or $5,000 fine. The question now arises to what prosecutive action should be taken against Otto Kuehn as one, Friedel Kuehn, and whether or not jurisdiction would be in the Military Commission or United States District Court, which is not now functioning in criminal cases. The question of policy also arises in view of the fact that the evidence which would be necessary to convict the Kuehns in any court would involve the Japanese Consul General and certain members of staff who have consular diplomatic immunity. In a regular criminal court, he's not required to testify against himself. Okay, so, and this was sent, this report was sent on a clipper ship on probably January 8th, but reports were written January 5th, and meanwhile Kuehn was confessing January 1st through 3rd. They probably weren't aware of his confession, so that's why they go into this detail here. It's my belief that if Otto Kuehn is tried before the Military Commission, a sentence of death will be meted out. There's no question but what public prosecution of Kuehn and public dissemination of the evidence on which the conviction was obtained would have a good, wholesome effect on public morale. So basically, they want to kill Kuehn for public morale. Particularly the part of the evidence would now consider the Japanese espionage activity in Hawaii in the consulate itself. I do not know yet if the Army will be inclined to bring Kuehn before the Military Commission without waiting for an opinion from the Attorney General or the State Department, but I assume they will take no action until after the Attorney General has the opportunity to review the above facts, these facts, and consult with the members of the Cabinet involved. It is believed, however, that a decision should be reached at the earliest possible time, so the appropriate prosecutive action be taken here, not only for the fact it would have, it's a preventive measure, but for the general morale citizens on these islands. That's from Robert L. Schubers. Now, all this is pretty much a reiteration of what we've gone over before. They do say that they knew for a fact that $70,000 was deposited to credit their bank by the Rotterdam Bank Association between May 14th, 1936 and February 7th, 1939. Kuehn states that his income from Germany stopped in 1938. And they just basically reiterate everything. He paid $21,000 for the property in Honolulu. I don't know where they get all these details. It's secondhand. He turned down the opportunity to spy for the American government. That the Nazi officials aboard some ship that came into Honolulu in 1936, he was persona non grata. No lights were ever seen. They hemorrhaged money. Germans suspect. Now I'm going to comment on this again about the Germans suspecting he doesn't supply a date, which is critical, of the Kuehns supplying information to the Japanese government. Well, according to their own wires, and that suspicion was raised in 1939, I believe. I highlighted it in pink here. I think this will be the third time I've gone over this. Yeah, this report was written September 26, 1939. This was six months before the response from Honolulu that was decrypted by the Naval Office, in which they said they had no idea who Kuehn was. So, if it doesn't matter whether the Germans suspected that he supplied information about them to the German government, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because sure as shit, the Japanese didn't know who he was in June of 1940. When they tried to then they went to the German consul in Hawaii, Robert Lang, and tried to gain their legal status in Germany, and that's blacked out for some reason. But they have this Junius article reappearing, which is a clear assassination attempt, and it's nothing to do with. It was probably just some naval officer getting nervous that he had told Kuehn too much information. And then here he goes on to say that, in spite of the assertions made here, which is very critical to this does not bode well for the credibility. Or I can see a motive for covering up what turned out not to, be the smoking gun, was that apparently now they're saying that they didn't get cooperation from, let's see, let's read that. With the investigation of this case, it is noted that unsuccessful attempts were made by the Honolulu office to enlist the cooperation of commercial radio and telegraph companies in turning over copies of communications relating to the national defense. On December 8th, 1941, subject with their daughter, Ruth Ann Moore, were taken into custody. So how is it, this is the same guy that wrote his December 29th memo. Is that not correct? Well, I don't know if it is. This was written 8 days later by an unknown individual, now saying that they didn't, and maybe it's because that earlier memo says, don't tell the rest of the government that we know how to decrypt the Japanese cables, So maybe that was just one part of the government deceiving the other, but it does contradict what he said earlier. Now we're on the 15th, 1942. According to the general, his trial started when? On January 28th. This is about 2 weeks before his trial. Investigation continued relative to the Otto, Kuehn, wife Friedel in connection with the Japanese espionage activities. Continued questioning of Otto has failed to develop further information to the previous statements. Investigation has fairly well established that $14,000 of cash given to Otto Kuehn in October 1940 was delivered by the Japanese consul general. These funds, all in $100 denominations, and this information came directly from Kuehn, are now being traced from their source, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, to determine the method of transmission to Honolulu. Notebook discovered in Kuhn's possession containing numerous newspaper clippings relative to the U.S. fleet operations in Hawaii waters. Investigation continuing. Now, let me just get one thing kind of clear here. And we do have, and amongst, I will say this, amongst, when Friedel Kuhn's luggage was inspected by the customs department, and some of her items were actually taken and checked for secret markings and all that other shit, secret inks. There were newspaper clippings in there, and a lot of them were just about the vegetation at certain islands, or Okay, and now in other situations, he had a bunch of newspaper clippings about naval, and again, we got to remember this guy was a naval enthusiast. There was the culture mostly in Germany amongst World War I vets for a long time was that they would sit around, be buddies, and swap old war stories. And they had admiration for boats and just knowing things, like that was their hobby. They liked to know things about boats and ships and military and what the state of the military was in general. They just liked knowing those things. It's like some people like knowing about, Japanese culture and art, whatever, right? That's why he tried to make the friends that he did. But beyond that, if you're talking about, well, Mr. Kuehn looked at the newspapers for publicly released reports of boat movements and supplied this to the Japanese consulate. Of course, the Japanese consulate was just as capable of reading the same newspapers. they made the information public. So how the hell is that espionage to hand public newspaper articles back? Public news releases that were made by the Army, Navy, whatever, and supposedly that's proof of culpability. It's not. It's not proof of any culpability. But the fact that it was still in his possession says that he did not deliver that information. Or if there was any information that he did deliver, it was derived purely from documents that were publicly available anyway. And so if you're going to charge Mr. Kuehn with espionage, you ought to charge the newspapers or the Navy itself with espionage. So, I mean, if they found that at the consulate, it might be a little worse, but still, I mean, you can't really say just because someone has publicly available newspaper articles that that's espionage information. The investigation set forth report has been conducted jointly by Blank and the writer relative to Otto Kuehn, wife, okay. This they're basically going to say, well, we picked him up. He was moved to the detention quarters at the U.S. Immigration Station on December 17th, as we saw from the other document, where the FBI had full access to him. And he was under constant guard up until January 5th. And he's placed in an individual detention room. He moved again, I guess. And he's questioned at great length to get more information regarding his contacts. Imagine how frustrating that would be if he had none. He constantly contended that he has nothing to add to the statements furnished from him. And he never furnished the Japanese consulate with any information regarding our defense activities. As a matter of fact, it was Kuhn's contention that his only purpose in supplying the set of signals to the Japanese consulate was as a means to secure their assistance in sending money to his son Leopold in Germany. He states that he never intended to furnish the consulate with information on our defense activities and instead intended, in fact, to double-cross them, and in fact denies ever having relayed any signals to the Japanese at any time. Although Otto Kuehn has denied any further collaboration with the Japanese consular officials other than set forth in previous statements, the information developed to date, particularly regarding the $14,000 cash paid to him in October 1941 by a person described by Kuehn, would indicate otherwise. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. It indicates that they wanted him to cooperate and they were trying to get him to cooperate. The doesn't mean they were. They're presuming what the power dynamic was, incorrectly, unfortunately. I don't know when was this written. This is the 5th. It's 2 weeks for his trial. Otto Kuehn has been stated the Japanese, unknown to him, did not tarry at his residence and depart almost immediately after leaving the 14 in cash. It is to be noted that the description furnished by Eberhard Kuehn set forth reference similar to that of the Japanese consulate. Oh, yeah. To white people, Japanese, they all look the same. I mean, whatever. He's a young kid. Now, Eberhard was probably 16 or 17 when this was happening. Actually, this was... he was born early 1926, if I remember right. So he was about 16. January 14th, the photograph, which is being retained in the file of this case, exhibited to Eberhard Kuehn, who stated the same was very similar to the Japanese who called to see his father in October. Further, he was very likely the same person, but he could not be positive. If you're worried of going to jail and being deported, you might not be very adamant about your rejection of the idea. Also, on January 14th, 1942, the photograph of Blank was shown to Otto Kuehn. He stated it was quite similar to the Japanese man who delivered the money, and he was positive of seeing this person. The photograph believed to be probably isn't. He too said the photograph was very likely the same. Kuehn, however, still contends that he was of the belief this man received by him was sent by blank from Japan, Kyogo, Baron Kyogo. He has, I know that from the redaction doesn't help there. We got that from somewhere else. He has stated that a Japanese boat was in the port of the day. The money was given to him, brought by the Japanese from the boat. As to be noted, Everhard Kuehn is positive the money was delivered on a Saturday, either the 18th or 25th of October. What did Kuehn say here? What did Kuehn say here in a second? July. He said the very end of October. What does it matter? The only two Japanese vessels in the port of Honolulu around October-November night were the Tatura Maru and the Taioyo Maru. Records from the daily report of the customs inspector reflect October 23rd, the part of the 24th, at the November, so it wouldn't have been that. It would have been the first one. It's definitely established there was no Japanese vessel in the port of Honolulu on any Saturday during October of 1941. This fact must have been known to Otto Kuehn, as if, we got you now. You got your dates incorrect. Yeah, just give me a break. This to me is completely immaterial. It has nothing to do with anything. Of the original 14,000 captured by Otto Kuehn, 5,000. So apparently, they found $5,000. They're not going to say what they did with it. They've redacted that out. Right. Okay. Plans are being effected through the cooperation assistance of blank to follow the plan outline as follows. Appropriate detention quarters are being selected at Schofield Barracks where necessary. Listening devices will be prearranged. These arrangements will be made January 15th. Thereafter, Ms. Kuehn will be transported separately under heavy military guard to these detention quarters, being given the impression that the trial by the military is being initiated, and they will then be placed in the same detention cell and left alone, while qualified inspectors will note their remarks. This is like psychological bullshit tactics, and they're basically terrorizing these two prisoners because they've chosen not to believe them. And it's already been stated. It's awful. If we're doing the same things the Nazis are doing, why fight them? What's the point of the war except to rid human beings of their numbers on Earth? So what they did, and this is going to lead up to the next interesting thing. So how far am I here? they did this, and it's really revealing that the trial did not happen until January 28th. They already have exculpatory evidence that they've chosen to ignore. They've ignored the fact that the Japanese consulate did not know who the Kuehns were as late as June of 1940. To my mind, that's but it's hard. It makes Kuehn's story a little more difficult to explain, but it can be, and I have. He certainly didn't admit to that, so, looks like he's being honest and forthcoming, but he's not. I at least know that much, but, and he's said he gave them, the Japanese government, information that could be used to damage the United States in war, and then being convicted on that. Now, they're not legal scholars, neither am I, but the FBI does assert that, and after all that, oh yeah, and okay, so we have Ruth Carson Moore, a married woman who was plucked up from her home because she's German on, the day after being probably herself terrorized by the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor. Still being held now. The mom, who they're not going to charge, so we might as well treat her as innocent as well. Friedel Kuehn, also been jailed. Her life completely stopped and put on hold for no other crime other than she's German. And may have information about her husband. There's a little stronger of a basis for that. We have a son, two sons, also jailed. Freedom completely ripped away from them for nothing. Just, the suspicion they might do something wrong. Ends up, the family gets separated. Youngest son gets thrown into the adoption circle. No, he doesn't, actually. I think he got deported. Oldest son is forced to go to the military. The daughter gets deported and gets separated from her first marriage. Her first marriage is ruined by this. And all they really have is a technicality on this guy. And they don't really have proof that he's betrayed them, and they have to go by his word anyway. Because that's the only evidence they really have, other than suspicion and a puffed up dossier that doesn't amount to anything. And now what they're going to do is they're going to decide they're going to tell Mr. and Mrs. Kuehn that he's going to have his last meal tonight, and let them discover on their own that they're in adjacent cells, and see what they say to each other while we record with listening devices. Don't even know if that's constitutional. Anyway, okay. Otto has given this office. This information developed from this plan will be reported without delay. On June 5th, Otto Kuehn gave to written authority to obtain his mail from the post office box. The contents were examined. If Kuehn himself opened the letters, however, no pertinent information was discovered. No shit, Sherlock. Right? I mean, wouldn't there be a last minute, if their little code signal plan to use the P.O. box was in place, wouldn't there be a last little postcard that got sent him? Even though as ridiculous as that sounds, however, no pertinent information was discovered. The written permission for two here is being maintained on the office of case. A registered mail receipt was taken for Kuehn's person. They were at station 1941. Receipt October 22nd, covering a 1 ounce letter mailed via Clipper. I checked the U.S. Post Office inspector, determined this letter was from Otto Kuehn. Doesn't say who to, all redacted. Of course, we get no details. In the statement under dated January 3rd, Otto Kuehn mentioned arrangement made by sending code messages, use of the grammar dictionary, own copy, blah, 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 Corey's May, special agent. But no record was located of any of the messages. So they're denying what they know. They're lying here. R.L. Shevers, who said not to tell don't tell certain people about this information. It's top secret. Puts in his report, goes out of his way to put in his report that, well, Kuehn told us that there was a wire sent from the consulate in July 1941, but we have not found it. In fact, he's a year off on that. Or I'm confused. I don't know what that's about, actually. In the plan of signals submitted to the consulate, which were outlined by Kuehn in his statements that no one knew had a damn clue about, they also said they might send the signals through want ads. Kuehn said nothing about signal flares. I'm sorry. No further information of any signals was known to Otto Lehman. Referring again to the search made of the Kuehn, that should have been redacted anyway. But all this should not. You can't tell me that all this is personal information. It's embarrassing. It's probably gonna be embarrassing to the FBI. I got it figured out though. So, referring again to the search, gross illegal activities that no one accepts as proper these days is completely blacked out. That's my accusation. Prove me wrong, please. Let me see what's there. Okay, there's a little facetiousness there. So you have a way out. Okay, referring again to the search made of the Kuehn residence. So, whatever. We don't know what's up there. You can guess. In fact, we do not know what's up there. It's black. Referring again to the search made of the Kuehn residence, numerous moving picture films were located, all of which were viewed. Notice pictures being obtained during travel to the Orient. Scenes in Hawaii of no significance, blah, blah, blah. And then in the file, there's a bunch of pictures and stuff I didn't bother to print out. They're basically of houses, military people with their garments on, a picture of his house. I don't need that to know what's going on. Photographs were also discovered, as well as photograph negatives. However, none of them of any value. Photographs of Kuehn's residence were obtained. They're being retained in the Honolulu file for reference purposes. Additional correspondence in German was also located, pertinent portions of which are quoted, and that's blacked out, and I think that's wrong. Because if it has any information about the aunt in Sweden, or their son Leopold, and why he needed his money, and why it was so important for them to play poker or chicken, or whatever you want to call it, with the Japanese consulate, who's gonna, they're basically playing a game. Can we get the consulate to be our money couriers for us? They won, but they lost at the end because the consulate sent no poison pill. Fuck you. You sent us no signals. We'll kiss our ass. We're gonna drop a little hint about a Lanakai house and see how that works out for you, Mr. Kuehn. So the Japanese they definitely wanted revenge. Okay. The originals of the above letters, along with their English translations, are being maintained in the Honolulu file in this case. So we have no information of what's said about Germany. It may be personal circumstances about his family. I mean, God, who knows? Maybe important war crime information that other researchers may want to know. Who knows? Among Otto Kuhn's possessions was discovered a loose leaf notebook containing numerous clippings, among which the section consisting of 17 pages devoted to clippings relative to the United States fleet movements and operations. Well, they're newspaper clippings from articles. You know, who cares? I don't care. You know, this is what we call public information. So how is it? Again, there's no valuable information he supplied to Japan that wasn't public or that they already knew. There comes confidential rat in. Subject signals from Lanakai. In compliance with instructions, blank, and the writer proceeded to Lanakai. Okay. On December 11th, 1941, and remained till the evening of December 19th. Okay, that's afterwards. Well, the attack was over. You know. And this is where we... In fact, this is redundant. Oh, okay. This is how we find out this is confidential informant N. This is very important. The following memorandum was received under date December 24th, 1941, Christmas Eve, from confidential informant N. In compliance with instructions, blank, and the writer proceeded to Lanakai on December 11th. Okay. In compliance with instructions, agents Poakai and the writer proceeded to Lanakai on December 11th. And, let's see, the writer is Agent McCarthy. Hello, confidential informant N. That has been public from the moment that this, you know, we figured that out. If you saw that page, and this congressional investigation on the Pearl Harbor attack didn't reveal his identity as confidential informant N, but we know who he is now. So this is Agent McCarthy, where that is, and I've gone over this in another video, but basically what they say is that they noticed no lights or signals or any activities taking place from the Lanakai house. And some Japanese guy was on the beach with a signal flare running at 6:45 a.m. You know, some next door neighbor could have, and I've gone over all this. Yeah. And then they kept watching for signals after and nothing was coming out, in case they were still there. And they say it's pending, so I should stop here. And that's only 2 of 8. But there is a case to be made, and there's packet number 3 does have some more interesting stuff. There is definitely a case to be made for as Mrs. Kuehn had put it, for Mr. Kuehn being the spy who was not. The Nazi spy who was not. There's a support for this. And I'll continue with my next one.